Good day, everybody. This disembodied voice you're hearing in the background is Russell Conti of Sewing Arts Center. And this is our second year with Row by Row Experience, and thank you for joining us. Our theme this year is There's No Place Like Home. And so I wanted to show you how we came to this and how easy it is actually to construct. It looks kind of complicated. It's actually pretty straightforward. When you receive your kit, you're going to get several things. In order to construct this block, you're going to need several things. You're going to want some good pins. We use clover flower head pins because we like them because they're long and they're really sharp. You're going to want some Microtex sharp needles from Schmetz or Class A sharp. Size 70 is what we prefer. We use Mettler cotton thread, 50 weight, and we use a medium gray so that it will blend into the background. Roxanne's glue basted. You want some thread trimming scissors, your rotary cutter, and then we use an add a quarter ruler. It's got a little lip on it so that it makes it really easy when you get ready to do your paper piecing to trim those seam allowances down to an exact 1/4 inch. But any quilting ruler will actually work for you. Now when you receive your kit, you're to receive written instructions, and we wanted to follow up with video because we know sometimes the written instructions kind of elude us. But you're going to receive 5 pages, and what you're going to do is you're going to tape them end to end like this so that you can create your pattern, okay? And they're just going to butt up to one another. There's no overlap. There's just a little bit of butt up like this, and then you're going to tape them. There is going to be a little bit of space in between, but that shouldn't create an issue for you. If it does, then what you can do is just connect the lines. So you receive 5 of those. As shown here, you're going to go ahead and tape them together. And then what we want you to do is we want you to cut very cleanly on this hillside line that separates the sky from the hillside. And then this is our yellow brick road. Here's the Emerald City. You're going to continue following that line across the hillside and the sky. Okay, you're going to cut that so that the sky and the Emerald City become one piece. Then you're going to go ahead and cut right here along the yellow brick road and this grassy hillside. You'll have 3 pieces. You'll have the grassy hillside, you'll have the yellow brick road, and you'll have the sky and Emerald City. The yellow brick road, the Emerald City, and the sky are all paper pieced. The crazy patch hillside is a crazy 9 patch that we're doing, and that one we'll do independently. So you'll cut this away, you'll cut that away. Okay. Now the thing that's very important, I'll repeat this throughout, is make sure you leave adequate seam allowances around the perimeters of the hillside here and at the bottom, okay? At the perimeters of the sky and the Emerald City, including the bottom edge as well. Leave them ample, don't get skimpy. And then also the same thing occurs on the yellow brick road. We want to make certain you leave ample seam allowances all the way around when you conclude the block so that when we get ready to sew it back together, you'll have something to work with. You'll also receive 3 pieces of fabric plus the cutout for the silhouette of the characters. And so you'll find one that's gradated from yellow to a dark yellow. And these are from Hoffman, they're Radiant Gradients. And if you need to find more of them, the SKU is 7510. This one is called Chartreuse. This one is called Sapphire. It's also SKU 7510, and it's also Radiant Gradient. And it goes from a light blue to a dark blue. The Chartreuse we're going to use for the yellow brick road. This we're certainly going to use for the sky. Great. And then finally, you're going to receive a 7-inch strip of emerald. Okie dokie. Now the emerald piece you're going to cut into 6 7-inch squares. You're going to have a light to dark, okay? And we're going to go ahead and move away this emerald piece right here. That's going to be part of your Emerald City later on. We're going to use this for the grassy hillside to create the 9 patch. And what we're going to do is we're going to take these and we're going to stack them. We want to stack them face up. And the way we want to stack them is I just took this one and I left it horizontal. And then I took this one and I stacked it vertically. Okay, and I just did that to create a little bit more chaos in our crazy 9 patch. Cool. Then we're going to take this one and stack it horizontally, this one vertically, and this one horizontally. Okay, so to create the grassy hillside, the crazy 9 patch hillside that we're going to do, we're going to take 5 of the 7-inch squares that we've cut. Again, we've placed them so they're vertical, horizontal, etc. Now don't be concerned if you don't get it that way. It's going to be quite fine either way. Don't forget to retain the really deep emerald colored one for the Emerald City later on. Do not use that as part of your Crazy 9 patch. You're only going to have 5 squares you're using. So you're going to match them up, and they're all going to be face up. Okay, what you're going to do once you've done that, you're going to take your ruler and you're going to take a slight angled cut about 1/3 of the way in from the right hand side or left hand side, and you're going to make a cut. Okay, don't get too aggressive with that angle. The more aggressive the angle is, when we finish, the smaller the finished square is that we can use, and we want to keep the square as large as possible. You're going to do that, and then your next step is simply to take this piece here and move it to the back. Just like that. Okay? Now you're ready for sewing. We're going to use the size 70 Schmetz Microtex needles. You want a stitch length of 2 millimeters and a good quality medium gray thread that will blend into the background. We prefer Mettler ourselves. And so what we're going to do is we're just going to take these like you would normally do, and you're going to place them faces together, or right sides together, and you're going to sew 1/4 inch along that edge. Okay. Once you've sewn that 1/4 inch, you're going to press all your seam allowances open. You can do it either open, you can press them toward the center, or you can press them toward the exterior. It really doesn't matter too much, but it's just a matter of personal preference relative to the way you typically do your pressing. Okay. Once you've done that, you're going to have squares that complete like this. And so they'll be assembled, and you can see I pressed toward the outside edge, like that. And they'll all be assembled along this one side. Once you've done that, what you're going to do is you're going to go ahead and you're going to restack, you're going to leave them stacked cleanly, and you're going to take another cut on this side. Okay, again, reasonably small. Don't get too aggressive with the angle. And you can do it in this direction, or you can do it in this direction. It's just a matter of personal preference. There's not a right or wrong to this. Okay. Once you've done that, you'll have something that looks like this, correct? Okay, and then we're going to do the same thing. We're going to peel this upper layer away, we're going to place it on the back, and then we're going to sew these together, just like we did the first time. And again, press the seams open to the inside or to the outside, whichever you typically employ yourself. When you've done that, you're going to have a block that finishes and looks like this. Kind of like a rail fence, okay, a little chaotic rail fence. Now what we want to do is we want to take another cut, either across the bottom or the top, about 1/3 of the way from the top or the bottom. And again, you want to keep it a reasonably small angle, not too aggressive with that. That's going to look like this. Okay. The same thing is going to occur. We're going to take the top layer, we're going to go ahead and move it to the background, and then we're going to sew these together, just like we've done before. And you'll have a block that finishes like this. Okay, and there's all of our different blocks. They're starting to get a little bit more chaotic, and by virtue of changing the colors up a little bit, they all become a little bit more interesting. Okay. Now we're going to take it one more time, a slight angle across the bottom, cut there. When you've done that, you'll have a block that looks like that, right? We're going to do the same thing. We're just going to align these. Now don't worry about matching up your seam allowances. They're not going to match up, and if they do, that's just happenstance. We're not concerned about that. And we're going to sew those all together. Cool. But we're going to sew it once we've taken this to the back, like that, so that we can get some more chaos, quote unquote, in our block. Once you've done that, you'll have all these blocks that look like this. Okay, cool. Now once we've done that, we want to go ahead and trim them to size. And you'll have squares, or 9 patches, that are finished, and mine happen to finish at 5.5 inches, and you really want to keep them as large as possible. Okay, so you'll notice 5.5 inches here. In order to do that, you're just going to take your ruler, and you're going to take it to the farthest edge, and you typically want to find the smallest block of your assortment, and you're just going to trim that perimeter edge there as close to the edge as you can, and keeping that in place. Once you've got that cleaned up, then you're going to take this cut edge and you're going to match it up to whatever would be square on this side, and again, in my case that was 5.5 inches, and then you'll trim this off. Once these are all accurate and trimmed, the next step is to sew 2 rows. We want two 2 blocks, and we want 3 blocks, just like that, sewn together. And again, employ your pressing method. I pressed toward the inside this time and pressed it to one direction that side. Again, if you want to press open, left or right, doesn't really matter. Typically my rule is the path of least resistance, so wherever there's the least amount of seam allowances or whichever side is darkest. Once we've done that, we're going to go ahead and we want to assemble this block to this one. Okay, and we want to assemble it so that it's kind of, think of it right justified. We want this edge to match up. Now, truth be known, if you want to shift it over just a wee bit, that's not a problem either. And that will keep all your squares just a little bit off so that nothing really matches up. But I sewed them like this. And that gave me a block that finished like this. Okay, now that's going to be our hillside. Once we have this, we want to take our template that we traced earlier, or we cut earlier. Okay, now the thing that's very important about this is we're doing paper piecing for the most part. This is the only piece that isn't paper pieced. So paper piecing, you typically work from the underside, and so once we flip the whole block over, it's going to be reversed. Okay, so this is the only piece that's not going to be reversed. So we want to make certain that we don't use the printed side of the pattern, we turn it over, and we trace from this side. Okay, so make certain the printed side is down and the fabric side faces up. Okay, otherwise the block will be in reverse and it won't work for the pattern. And what you want to do is you simply want to take a chalk line and chalk right along this perimeter right here. Okay, once you've done that, what I did is I went ahead and stitched right on that chalk line. Okay, and I can show you that here. So I sewed that, so that gave me a pressing line to press against. So we want to go ahead and take that. We'll take that away. I'll show you what we have here. So again, we traced here, and then I sewed a very small stitch, about a 1.5 millimeter stitch length, all the way along that edge, just to give it a bit of an edge so it'd be easier to press under. Okay, and then make certain you leave yourself a seam allowance of about 1/4 inch on the under edge here. Okay, once you've stitched that, then you want to press this under, and this is ready to set aside at this juncture. So our grassy hillside is done. The next portion of the block that we're going to work on is the sky and the Emerald City. Okay, now from the sky piece, the half yard that you received of the blue gradient that goes from light blue to dark blue, you want to take a 7-inch square from the lighter portion of the blue that we're going to use for the background of the Emerald City. Okay, so cut that first, 7-inch by 7-inch, and you're going to take that and the emerald green piece that you retained from the first green, we're going to take those and replace them faces together like this. Okay. So make certain the right sides are together. And what you want to do is you want to sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance across the top and a 1/4 inch seam allowance across the bottom. Okay. What we're going to do when you've done that is you're going to go ahead and you're going to take this and you're going to cut straight through the center of it. Okay. So you're going to end up with 2 halves. And you're going to take these, you're going to press the seam allowances open, and you'll have 2 pieces that you can use for your Emerald City. Roughly 3.5 inches on this side, 3.5 inches on that side, actually 3.25. Okay, so that's what we want to end up with. And we'll set those aside for the time being. Okay. And then we have our sky block here. Now, if you've not done paper piecing before, it can be a little bit odd because you're working from the back side and it's all in reverse. So eventually, what we're looking at, this is going to be the wrong side, and this will be the public side, or the face side of the piece. What's most important is you want to look at your piece and determine what the sizes need to be, your strips. And so we didn't pre-cut strips for you because that would be a little bit complicated with the number of strips that come through here, so that way you can just go through and figure out what you need. I tend to be a bit more excessive about the seam allowances I leave because I'm always concerned I'm going to cut them too shy. So what we want to do is we simply want to measure the widest portion of the rectangle we're going to be cutting for. Okay, this is roughly 1 1/8 inches. And then we also want to measure the longest portion of it. Okay, and so this is roughly about 7.5 inches. Okay, now 1 1/8 inches plus our seam allowances on either side, 1/4 and 1/4, would make 1 5/8 inches of width. Myself, I would cut that about 2.25, 2.5 inches, just for safety's sake, because I want ample seam allowances around the perimeter of the piece, and this is the bottom of the block. So probably 2.25 would be quite ample and successful, but gauge that for your own needs. Okay, we're going to assemble piece 1 and piece 2 at the same time. Okay, so we also need to measure for piece 2. Now the widest portion of that is roughly 1 inch, so 1.5 inch piece would be ample. However, I would probably do 2 inches just to be safe, and then I'm going to measure the longest portion of it. Okay, And in this case, that's right at 9 inches. So I'm probably going to cut it about 11 or 12 inches just for my own sanity. Now the trick to this is you want to match these up so that the first piece is face down or face away from you, okay? So again, when this is going to be the public side, that's what it's going to look like. So we want that to be face down. The second piece we want face up, because eventually what's going to happen is we're going to sew right here, and that's going to flip over, and then it'll be the seam allowance, there'll be a seam allowance that it gets assembled to on the other side. So again, this one face up, okay. This one face down, okay. Very important. Now what we want to do is we want to make certain that we're a 1/4 inch from this line here. So if you look there, you can see that we've got a 1/4 inch of lap in behind that line right there, and you can't probably see it from the camera, but I can see it from this side. We also use Carol Doak's foundation paper piecing paper. This one's not that, but if you use the foundation paper, it's a little bit more translucent and you can see through a little bit easier, and it also tears away a lot easier than just using regular bond paper. So we don't really suggest bond paper for paper piecing. It will work, but it just makes your life a bit more complicated. So what we want to do is once we've got those matched up, what you can take is you can go ahead and pin this together to hold it, okay? And then going beyond your seam allowance, you're going to start out here, and you're going to sew right on that line. Okay, so start out here, and then come in and sew right across all the way down here, and continue beyond your seam allowance. I typically like to go out for about another 1/2 inch to 1 inch myself, because again, I like to have lots of play later on when I decide I want to correct things. Your stitch length should be short also. We don't want to use a standard regulation stitch length because when you go to tear the paper out, you'll also tear the stitch. So we use those size 70 needles that we like to use, the Microtech Schmetz, and then we drop the stitch length to basically about 1.5 if your machine will do that. Okay, so they bring it to right here and we'll stitch right along that edge, and what that will give us so right like that, we've stitched all the way down. You can see I've stitched well beyond. You can see I left long tail here to make certain I actually go well beyond my seam allowances. Then we take this and we press it in that direction. Okay. Now I do press with an iron, but don't use steam. If you use steam, you risk shrinking your paper. So we just press it so that it faces up like that, and so you'll see how that works. So again, the first one is face down. The second one is face up, and we're looking at it. We stitch along that line, we turn it over, and we press up in this direction. Just like that. Okay, then we're ready for the next one, just about. What we want to do is we want to find that crease line. So I just usually fold against the paper like this first, so right on that line. Okay, then I can see it, then I fold against it this direction. Now again, if you're using standard paper piecing paper, you can see it, and so you don't need to do this twice, you can just fold in this direction. What we want to do before we attach the next piece, fold that out to see that amount of seam allowance that's left over, and we just want a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So that's where the add a 1/4 ruler comes into place. We just place that so that it nests right up against the fold of the paper, and then we cut right on that line. Okay, and that will leave us a 1/4 inch seam allowance here so that we're ready to attach our next piece. And here's our next piece right here. Cool. And again, it's going to sew right along this edge where these two match up. Oop, I apologize, I'm not showing it to the camera. So we're going to match those up so they match up. We're going to pin it so it doesn't move. We're going to make sure we have ample fabric front and back. And then we're going to sew right along that line as well. And we just continue this process until we get all the way to this Emerald City. Okay? Now here we are with it at the point of the Emerald City. Okay, so we've pieced all these in. Okay, we've pressed them all. You can see we've left all the excess fabric around the edges so that later on we can clean it up as much as we need to, and we have lots of extra fabric to play with. But what we want to do at this point is we want to look at the Emerald City, and this is the next block we're going to piece into place. Now if you joined us for our, I think it's a sign row by row experience block last year, this is the same technique we used for that block. We simply cut a piece of fabric, and then when we paper pieced it, what we did is we measured the width, okay, and then we added some excess to make sure we had ample both sides. So that's a little bit more than a 1/4 inch, so this is about 1 1/4 inches of fabric right here. What we're going to do is, again, face up So the seam allowance is matching up here, so let me try this from this side so I can get it matched up in the line. It's a little hard to show on the camera. But there's our line right there. You can't see through the camera, but I can see through the paper right here. And what we want to do is make sure this line matches that and that the Emerald City is at the bottom, or the emerald portion of it. So that's going to match up just like that, face down against the face-up fabric here. Once we've done that, then we're just going to sew right along this edge, and then we're going to fold it out, okay, so that it matches the other side, just like we've been doing. Cool. So I've broken that out in a smaller version over here so I can show you more successfully, okay. So here's our Emerald City. Here's one EC for Emerald City. We want this piece face down. We want this piece face up. We want this over 1/4 inch, and we want that first one, that line, to match there. That line is going to match with that line there on the back. And then we're going to sew that and then press it forward, open. So you can see our first one is sewn and then pressed. Okay, that's what we're getting right there. Then we're going to take the next one. Make sure the emerald is at the bottom. We're going to match up that intersection of the emerald with the blue sky with that line that's on the pattern. And we're going to sew that one right there and then continue across until we complete. When it's completed, this is what it'll look like, okay? And this is what the back looks like, just so you have a sense about that. So all those intersections of those lines right there just indicate where the intersection of the fabric meets the sky. The Emerald City meets the sky, okay? Once you've completed the Emerald City, you're just going to continue with the sky block, and you're going to continue yourself right across that way. You'll notice that we just kind of varied the colors as they went around the sky just to make it more interesting. You can do as you like, okay? Once you've done that, you're going to go ahead and take this edge here, and you're going to turn it over, and you're going to press it up, okay? Now if you want to use a little bit of starch, that's not a bad thing. I didn't bother to use starch, I just steamed a little bit. But we want to press right on that line, just like that, okay? All the way around that edge. Later on, if you want to trim it, you can. I don't usually trim it again at this point simply because I like to make certain I've got everything correct. So we paper pieced it, we added it in our Emerald City, we paper pieced the edge here. Once we've done that, we turn it over and we press that bottom edge up against the fabric. Now we're ready for assembling the yellow brick road. I've got everything identified. We've got piece 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and so on. And 1 gets it sewn to 2, and then once we sew in 2, then we attach 3, and then we attach 4, and we just keep following the numbers as we go along. Now the same thing is going to apply as we did for the sky. We want to make certain that we measure the length, okay, and give ourselves some fudge room. Okay, so the longest length of that particular portion, in this case it's about 13 inches, so I plugged in about 15 inches just to be safe. The height is about 2 inches, so I did about a 3-inch block here just because, again, like I told you, I like to have a larger safety margin. And there should be ample fabric for you to do that. Okay, we've given you a half yard of fabric, and at the end you need to have completed this. Now the fabric gradates from light to dark, and so I started with a light toward the front, and I moved toward dark toward the back, just for some reference and some interest, so that it looked like it was receding into the background. So the same thing is going to occur. The first line that we want to connect is the line between 1 and 2, which is right here from here to here. Now this can be a little bit deceiving because it's a flying geese block, and it's a curved flying geese, and that comes to a point here. So when we're sewing it, what we want to do is we want to, again, start at the edge here, make sure your stitch length is 1.5 or thereabouts, and we're going to sew on directly on the line. Okay. And then you could sew beyond the line and then tear that paper away, or you can just sew to the point and then back stitch. And then we can take it off the fabric from that point. Now it's important that you sew directly on the line. It is not so important that your seam allowance is 1/4 inch. Okay, so don't be too concerned about that. We want to keep it scant, but we don't need to be really concerned about it being perfectly 1/4 inch. So again, we're going to sew directly on that line. Once you've done that, this is what you're going to have. You're going to have sewn, and you can see I sewed beyond. Now that can be a little bit cumbersome, so don't be afraid just to stop right at the point and back stitch. But sew right there and sew all the way down to here. Once we've done that, you're going to fold this back out of the way on the seam line so you can cut your seam allowance. And you can see I've got my fabric right here that I've already cut away. And the same thing's going to occur. We're going to use our add a quarter ruler. We're going to nest it right along the edge of the paper. Nest there, come on. Don't fuss with me. And then we're going to trim that away all along that edge. Okay. Once you've done that, you fold the second piece up and you press that away. Okay. Now the flying geese, the center portion of it, we used as the light yellow, or the lighter portion. So we use the edges as the darker portions, just so you're aware of that. Okay. So 1, 4, 7, 10, 13, 16, 19, 22 are all in the lighter portion of the yellow and are the center of the road. Once we've done this portion, then we are ready for the second portion. Okay. And what we're going to do before we actually connect the other side is we're going to fold this back on the line, okay, to find our line. And you can see I tore the paper a little bit to do that. We're going to take this, and I left that attached so I could show you. There we go. We're going to take our ruler right along the edge of the paper where the seam is, okay, and then we cut right along this edge to get rid of that excess fabric that we don't need, and that provides us a line that we can match up our next piece of fabric. Okay. So when we attach that one, we didn't talk about that, we measure the length, okay, add ourselves some fudge, measure the height, add some excess so that you don't run out of fabric as you're working along. Piece 3, the same thing. I'm going to look here, that's roughly 4.5 inches long, so I did it about 7 inches long. And then we have this height here, which is almost 2, so I did 2.5, just to be safe right there. Okay? Let's set that aside. I'm going to pin in place so you can see my long piece of fabric. And we're going to sew beyond the block, along the line. Again, you can sew beyond and tear later on, or you can sew to the point and backstitch. But just be really careful you sew directly to the point and not beyond. Okay. Once we've done that, then we're ready to press this forward. Okay. And then we're ready to attach piece number 4. Okay. And what we would do in that portion is we'll fold this back on the line that intersects. So 3, 2, and 4. We want to fold that crease line. You can see here I'm going to tear the paper just a little bit. Fold directly on that line. Use our ruler again, and we cut this excess away. Okay. And then that will give us the portion for our next goose block, the yellow piece right here. And we just continue as we work our way up, all the way to the top of the piece. Now you notice at the top they get really kind of small, so you may want to decrease your stitch length a little bit more. And if it's a little bit complicated for you to do, as I've done on mine, I just left the rest of it dark. I didn't bother putting in 19 through 23. I just stopped here, and that way I didn't have to work with that. So if that makes it a little bit easier for you, don't hesitate to do that. It won't compromise the pattern at all. Okay. Now that we've done that, we want to trim this excess. Okay, so clean it up a little bit. Make sure you leave seam allowances. 1/4 inches should be fine, but truth be known, like I said, sometimes I want to make certain that I can really rally it and move it around if I need to, because the block is pretty forgiving. Your finished dimensions are 9.5 by 36.5 inches before you get sewn into the quilt. And so we want to make certain that we end up with enough to be able to accommodate that. So you'll see there's ample seam allowance here at the bottom to fudge it up and down. Okay, and there's ample side to side. And now we're ready for going ahead and putting the piece together. We've constructed our sky block with the Emerald City, we've constructed our yellow brick road, and we've constructed our grassy hillside. Okay, so now that we've assembled the yellow brick road, we've assembled the skyline of the Emerald City and the grassy hillside, we're ready to assemble them. Okay. Now what I would suggest doing is taking your original pattern, okay, and you do that, and placing it face down. If you can't see all the way through the paper, just to trace the line of the edges of the yellow brick road, the bottom of the pattern, and the skyline, okay, and then the grassy hillside. That way you know exactly where to place things. So for instance here, I'm going to place that right on the lines where it matches up with the yellow brick road. Now you can't see that with the camera, but I can see it right here where I am. Cool. Great. Now that we've done that, what we want to do is we want to take the grassy hillside, and I'm going to talk to you in a moment about this, because initially I told you to press this all underneath. We're going to want to clip this right where it matches up with the Emerald City and press that upper edge open, because this is going to lay over the top of the yellow brick road. It's going to lay under the skyline right there, so that this whole edge here gets captured by the skyline. Okay? So you're going to place this, you're going to place this. Once you have a good sense about where you want it to be, because this edge right down here should match up pretty nicely. Okay? And this distance right here should be a 1/4 inch away from the edge, so when you sew it into place, you'll get that point right at the edge. If it's not right at the edge, don't get crazy, it'll be fine. And then we want all these points to match up. Okay. Now the most successful way we found to do this is to use the Sharon Chamber's Pisliqué technique. It's a beautiful technique. And so you can just look that up online, Sharon Chamber, S-C-H-A-M-B-E-R. And it's called Pisliqué. But what you do is once you've turned this edge back, you're going to take a little bead of glue right along the edge, right there, with the Roxanne's glue paste, just to that point there. You're going to place it back down, and you press it with the iron. That gives it a temporary hold. And then the Pisliqué technique is you open this up, and right where that stitch line is, you stitch on the inside edge to connect it that way. If that's a bit too cumbersome for you, the other way that's equally successful is to go ahead and glue it in place as I just indicated, and then just stitch with monofilament very close to the edge here, or a small zigzag, and that'll attach that really quite nicely so that it becomes imperceptible to anybody. Okay? Once we've done that, then we want to go ahead and place the sky in place. We're going to follow our pattern and template for that as well. And this should match up over here nicely. This should come right across here, and that should all be covered up there. There we go. Cool. Once we know it's all in the position we want it to be in, then we're going to do the same thing. We're just going to lift this edge. We're going to put a bead of glue right along that edge of the skyline all the way across, lay it back down, and then what I do is I just bring the iron over to my table, put a cloth over the top, and just give it a little heat so that it sets everything. And again, if you're familiar with Sharon Chamber's Pisliqué technique, you can turn the other edge under, you can stitch it, it'll all be completely stitched. Or again, you can just simply take a light monofilament and take a small zigzag along the edge, or a straight stitch right along the edge too, and that will be quite fine. And then your block is finished, outside of trimming the excess edges from the edge right there. Included in your kit also is the silhouette of the characters. What we're going to do is we just peel off that residual paper from the back, and you simply place them wherever you'd like them to be. Okay? Once you place them, you're going to go ahead and press them in place, and then you're going to top stitch reasonably close to the edge with monofilament, okay, or zigzag stitch, just so that they're anchored to the background. And then your block is complete. So I want to go over the grassy hillside one more time, just to make certain that the instructions that I provide you are very clear. Okay, so we've constructed the crazy 9-patch blocks. We have 3 across the bottom, we have 2 across the top. Again, you want them to be right justified, in a sense, and you want to bring those in just a little bit if you like. There's not a big issue if you do or don't. However, you'll notice that when you place your pattern on top of it, it's going to be very tight at this corner if you right justify it. So that's quite fine, but if you need a little bit more fudge room, simply move these 2 blocks in about an inch or so. That'll also keep these seam allowances from having to intersect as much, and you'll have a little less bulk right there. Now once you've sewn these together and press your seam allowances, then what you're going to do is you're going to place your template, okay, and you want the face, the printed side, toward the correct side or the face side of the fabric. Okay, that's very important again, because the crazy 9-patch of this particular block or this pattern is the only piece that is not paper pieced. So we need to make certain that we give it a mirror image. The paper pieced portions will already be mirror imaged. So we want this again, so that the printed side is face against the face of the fabric. So right sides in a sense, printed side toward the right side of the fabric. We're going to place those down, okay? And what we're going to do, once you've done that, is you're going to chalk a line right along this perimeter edge. Okay. Once you've chalked that line, what I like to do is go ahead and then come back through and stitch right there on the line. Okay, we're going to stitch right there. And then once you've done that, you're going to go ahead and press this edge underneath. Okay. Now, eventually, this is going to flip back out, but go ahead and press this all underneath just so you have it a little easier. And if you have stitched the line, press it so that the stitch line is ever so slightly pressed toward the underneath. That way you won't see those stitches later on when you get ready to construct this block. Okay, so we've chalked our line. A 1/4 inch away from that chalk line, we trim it. Okay, so we remove the rest of the block. We stitch the line on the chalk line, and then we press that seam allowance underneath. Now we're ready for constructing the block. What we want to do is we want to take the yellow brick road portion that we've already constructed, and we're going to place it so that the intersections of the geese match up to the edge of the hillside here. Okay, I'll move that over a little bit more towards center camera. And so the bottom should match up. And then right there, there, those should all match up, and this should actually match up at the top like that. Now you're going to notice that this is pressed back out, and what I've done is I've clipped this seam allowance so that can press up. Eventually, this is all going to get captured by the sky, like that. Once we've got this positioned the way we think it should be relative to our pattern, what we're going to do is we're going to lift this up, and you're going to place a bead of glue, the Roxanne's glue base, right along that folded edge, right to there. And then we're going to bring that back down and just bring your iron over and give it a quick press without steam, just to kind of set the glue so it'll give you a temporary hold. Using the Sharon Chambers piece of clay technique, what you can do is you can open this up at that point because the glue will hold it in place, and you can sew it right in that stitch line, and that'll give you an invisible stitch. If you're not familiar with that technique, then the other thing that's quite successful and easy to do is simply to take monofilament or a green thread and then either stitch very close to the edge on the hillside, okay, or do a small zigzag to connect the two pieces to the point where the stitch has been clipped out like that. Okay? Once you've done that, then you're ready to place the hillside or the skyline in place. And that's going to match up like this. And again, optimally, the edges of your flying geese will match up to the skyline. If they're not perfect, don't worry about that. It's not a big deal. We just want to make sure it's covered and captured. Once you've got that in place, you're going to do the same thing. You're going to fold this back. You're going to place a bead of glue along this edge. You're going to heat set it with the iron just to hold it in place, and then you can open this up to employ Sharon Chambers piece-lacqué technique, or again, simply stitch very close to the edge in monofilament or a light blue color perhaps, or a zigzag very close to the edge. Then your block is prepped for truing, and what you'll do at that point is you'll simply measure the perimeter and you'll clean it up so that you have a block that's going to be 9.5 inches by 36.5 inches when it's complete. Well, thank you again for joining us this year for our Row by Row Experience 2016. We really had a great time making this block for you. It was a great amount of fun for us, and we're really pleased with the outcome. Hope you are as well. If you have any questions or concerns or comments about it, don't hesitate to call us or email us. You can reach me at Russell, R-U-S-S-E-L-L, at sewingarts.com. That's SEWINGARTS.com. Our telephone number is 310-450-4300, and our website is sewingarts, SEWINGARTS.com. You'll find all these instructions on our website under the Row by Row Experience link toward the bottom of the home page. And again, thank you very much for participating with us this year. We really look forward to seeing you again and look forward to next year.